In 1983 and 1984, President Mugabe of Zimbabwe slaughtered, that's the operative verb, slaughtered 20,000 members of the Ndebele ethnic group who lived in Western Zimbabwe solely because they opposed his political party, which was based on the larger ethnic group in Zimbabwe. Slaughter was overwhelming. It was crazed. People were burned in their own homes, and numbers of people were executed after they had dug their own graves. And all of this has come conclusively to light by virtue of a number of written cables which were published this last week, showing what was said, what was fired off from the diplomatic missions in Zimbabwe to their respective capitals. In the case of Canada, the High Commissioner to Zimbabwe, and this is chronicled in an excellent article in the Globe and Mail, the High Commissioner to Zimbabwe wrote back to Ottawa to say that what was happening amounted to, I'll use his words, a reign of terror. And the response from Ottawa was appallingly deficient. It was like kind of a descent into immoral depravity. Curiously enough, oddly enough, the Prime Minister at the time was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who is the father of the current Canadian Prime Minister and was always regarded as a very principled and progressive fellow. But Canada's response was to say, look, effectively, cool it. What we'll do is call it a civil conflict. We'll acknowledge that the dissidents in Western Zimbabwe have to be dealt with, and we'll deal with it ourselves in an amicable way. And then, as if that wasn't enough, they invited Mugabe just a few months later to a state visit to Ottawa, where with full regalia he was feted by all. And of course, the massacres were never mentioned. Much the same response came from the United Kingdom. Much the same response came from the United States. Everybody was more interested in economic gain and in investment rather than the horrible human rights atrocities. And thus it was, right at the outset of his tenure, that Mugabe's ruthlessness was sanctified by the Western world and would then characterize the same ruthlessness over the subsequent 30 and more years. So it's no surprise that as recently as 2002, the elections were mired in violence. And as recently as 2008, as AIDS-Free World showed through its own work, crimes against humanity were committed, orchestrated by Mugabe's political party, when large numbers of women were raped solely and exclusively because they supported the opposition party. When Mugabe dies, and it can't come soon enough for me, how do these criminals hold on for such long lives? When Mugabe dies, he'll probably be succeeded by his wife, who can legitimately be called a murderer in waiting. Thus Mugabe's legacy, in which the Western world at the outset was complicit. That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis.